You're very welcome back. Now, Tipperary farmer Patrick Quirke began a mandatory life sentence on Wednesday after being found guilty of the murder of his alleged love rival Bobby Ryan.
The country's longest ever murder trial before a jury came to a dramatic conclusion when the 6 men and 6 women who'd sat through more than 3 months of explosive evidence returned to the courtroom to deliver the verdict.
The Mr Moonlight Murder is a Virgin Media News documentary examining the murder and subsequent trial. Joining us now is Deborah Naylor, courts reporter with Virgin Media News.
But before we speak to Deborah, let's take a look at a preview from the documentary, which airs tomorrow night at 10.
When we get a phone call in relation with the search, there's one question we ask of the person that rings us: is there a PLS site, place last seen? Of course, everyone would like to start there. We weren't asked to search there. We were asked to eliminate the wood, and that's what we've done.
We don't know what level of searching was done. We can't question that because we don't know. We were brought to search the wood here on that day. So we did what we were asked to do.
You know, the Gardaí did face a number of criticisms by the defence, the failure to find Bobby Ryan in the initial search of Fánagáin. However, the Gardaí, you know, pointed out that they had relied on Pat Quirke, who had showed them around the farm, and they had relied on him to tell them of the existence of the tank. He told them there were 2 tanks on the farm. He didn't mention the other tank.
If we were asked to search the farm, I have no doubt in my mind we wouldn't be here today. That body would have been found that day. I have no doubt in my mind that would be the case.
Deborah Naylor, a very good morning to you. A tragic case that, as we mentioned earlier on, has really captured the imagination of the country. The longest-running murder trial in the history of the state. So this has been 3 months?
3 months. The jury were actually sworn in this case on January 14th this year. And the case was originally supposed to last 6 to 8 weeks. We were, told at the outset it was circumstantial. It's going to be based on circumstantial evidence. There was no smoking gun, as it were. There was no murder weapon in this case. Went on much longer than expected, and a verdict was only reached last Wednesday.
Now, we're looking at lots of revelations coming out in the Sunday papers today after an explosive case like this. But talk us through, for anyone who isn't entirely familiar with the entire case, the 3 key characters, first of all, Deborah.
Well, probably the easiest person to start off with is Mary Lowry, and she was living with her husband Martin and 3 children on a farm in Fánagáin. And Martin, her husband, passed away in 2007. Mary's sister-in-law would have been Imelda Quirke, who was Martin's brother, and Imelda Quirke was married to Patrick Quirke. And after Martin died, well, a few months after, it was around 4 months after, an affair started between Patrick Quirke and Mary Lowry. And Patrick Quirke had taken over the lease on the farm, so Mary gave evidence in the trial that she didn't know how to run a farm, and she was left with 3 young children after her husband's death. So Patrick Quirke took over that lease, and he was on the farm. Then they had an affair, what she described in court as a seedy and sordid affair that lasted for a number of years. And then Mary's evidence was that, she brought that affair to an end because of the guilt, and she described how she was very vulnerable. And that's how it started. But after that, she met Bobby Ryan, who was a local, very popular DJ, known as Mr Moonlight in the area. And Mary Lowry started a relationship with Bobby Ryan, and Patrick Quirke was still leasing the land on the farm, and there was Patrick Quirke, we heard throughout the trial, was not happy about this relationship, and he wanted to get back with Mary Lowry, and we heard evidence of the breakdown of their subsequent relationship. And then ultimately in June 2011, on the 3rd of June 2011, Bobby Ryan went missing. And nobody knew what happened to him until 22 months later. It was Patrick Quirke who found his body in a runoff tank on the farm. And as we subsequently know, Patrick Quirke staged the discovery of his body, and it was him who murdered Bobby Ryan.
Now, looking at the footage there, obviously a very close-knit community in Fánagáin, torn apart. How much access did you have to those involved, I suppose, in the search, and then 22 months later? When you're talking about a long time ago, it's 8 years, so how are people's memories?
Well, we In between covering the trial, I mean, I would have been in court every single day that this trial was on, but obviously it went on over such a long period, and there was a lot of legal argument in this trial over what could and couldn't be admissible evidence in court. So any days there were gaps, we did go down to Tipperary, and in that particular clip which we saw there, the day that Bobby Ryan went missing was a sunny day in Faunagown on June 3rd, as I said, 2011, and he had stayed in Mary Lowry's house the night before on her farm in Faunagown, and Mary gave evidence in the trial that he would stay a number of nights and he would always leave very early in the morning before he went to work. That particular morning, she said, you know, he left her house at 6:30 that morning. They had made love in the morning beforehand. She was still lying in bed. She said she would normally wait to hear his car go over the cattle grid. On that particular morning, it was 7 or 8 minutes before she heard that, but she didn't think anything particular of it. And then it was Bobby Ryan's employer, Niall Quinn, who worked in a quarry, who first went to his house to report that he hadn't turned up for work. And Robert Ryan, Bobby's son, who I have been speaking to, and, you know, he gave evidence in the trial that he knew this was totally out of character for his father. They knew straight away that something wasn't right. He was a man, Bobby Ryan was a man you could set your clock by. His employer knew straight away something was up, and that's when the search for him started. His
employer, Niall Quinn, did say he was unbelievably prompt, really regular, so this was a really kind of out of character day, wasn't it? Straight away there were warning signs.
Straight away Michelle was very concerned. You know, her father... We heard throughout the trial the breakdown of her father's relationship with her mother, Mary. She, you know, described her father as her best friend. They rang each other 20 times a day. You know, she said she knew everything about him, and he had a period of depression. She was a little bit worried about suicide initially, but she knew something wasn't right. And Michelle had met Mary Lowry that morning, and they were driving up to Mary Lowry's farm. Michelle said she could not explain why, but they went to Banshee Woods, and that is where they found the Mr. Moonlight van.
Deborah, you mentioned that you were in court throughout the whole 3 months. What was the reaction like, and was there any emotion shown by Patrick Quirke throughout the whole case?
Well, there was no reaction from him whatsoever on the day of the verdict, and I mean, you know, when you're in courtroom 13, and this was a courtroom that was absolutely packed every single day with journalists, with members of the public, the Ryan family, and I mean, it's actually hard to describe the tension in that room as we heard that the jury had come back and reached a verdict after over 20 hours of deliberations in a trial that was over 3 months, you know, and Patrick Quirke bit his lip as he sat there waiting, awaiting his fate and waiting for a verdict. There was no emotion from him whatsoever when he heard that verdict, and he was probably absolutely shocked. You know, the Ryan family broke down. But the only time in the entire 3 months that Patrick Quirke did show any emotion whatsoever was on one particular day, and it was Mary Lowry's youngest son who was actually giving evidence, and Mary Lowry's son was talking about growing up on the farm in Faunagown, and he was talking about Patrick's youngest son, Alan, who we heard throughout the trial tragically died in 2012 in a farm accident on the Quirke farm in Branchemore. Again, another tragedy in this case, because when you think of Imelda Quirke, she first lost her brother Martin to cancer. In 2012, she lost her son, and now she is left with the fallout of this trial, and she supported her husband Patrick the whole way through this trial, and now he's been convicted. She
stood by his side.
She did. She went to court every single day with him. They arrived in court every day, and you can just imagine the evidence that she had to listen to about the affair, because this entire trial was all based on circumstantial evidence. So we heard so much detail about Patrick Quirke's affair with Mary Lowry and about the breakdown of that relationship, and you know, a number of things. The Dear Patricia letter in 2011 that he wrote to the newspaper saying that, you know, they had broken up by this stage. He was still in love with Mary Lowry. He said he wasn't in love with his wife, but Imelda did stand by him the whole way through.
Well, a thorough investigation from your end, no doubt. And in fact, the Virgin Media News documentary, The Mr. Moonlight Murder, airs tomorrow night at 10 right here on Virgin Media 1. Deborah, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Deborah. Now we'll take a quick break. Lots more to come. Stay with us.